Good afternoon. Today I thought I'd mix things up a little bit by introducing, showing, demonstrating a DP history lesson that I did with my students on historiography, and then using that to put together compare statements. I say compare and not contrast for the simple reason that contrast, in my experience, is usually much easier for students than comparing, especially when they need to look at texts or quotes. And then they have to find pieces of information within the quote or the text to another quote in another document rather, or what have you, and then find that comparison and then write it into a statement that is standard, at least for DP. But what I used for this lesson are some of the aspects and strategies that I did for AP World History when I taught a few years back. So in any case, what I wanted to do was put together or at least highlight the strategies that I used that helped me with my DP students. And if you are an AP history, world history, US history, what have you, or DP history teacher, watch this video, take what you can, and let's get started. So I'm gonna work from a Google Doc. What you're first gonna need, first of all, the topic is gonna be World War I. We were talking about the Versailles Treaty. And I found, or I'm using these three quotes here. You can find a plethora of quotes online if you have a textbook, if you want to use those. What I recommend is to have quotes if you're going to be doing this exercise, looking at both sides. First, we're going to look at the negative. So in this case, you have three quotes that kind of highlight the negative of the Treaty of Versailles in respect towards the treatments of Germany. Okay, so what the students had to do for this exercise was come up with three quotes, or look at the three quotes rather, and find some of the language in the three quotes that they think could highlight a comparison. And then we were going to put that comparison into a quote. Now, the first part is identifying kind of the negativities. And just to kind of speed it up a little bit, I chose quotes 2 and 3. As you can see on the screen, they both indicate that the Treaty of Versailles not only was harsh towards Germany, but wasn't going to lead toward a lasting peace. So when we put this together into a compare and contrast statement, I got these from the students, and I kind of wanted to challenge them. They have done this before, but in any case, these were the quotes that I got, and they weren't very good because they weren't in the format that we had practiced. So in any case, you see one student here had put quotes 1 and 3, talk about the unfairness, et cetera, quotes 1 and 2, talk about the Treaty of Versailles, et cetera, et cetera. The format here wasn't quite what I wanted. So what I did was we transitioned, we talked about how to put it into a format. And I'm gonna kind of speed it up a little bit, but I want you to not feel that it is a terrible thing for your students to make mistakes or to make errors, but don't allow them to make those errors or mistakes for too long. Okay, if you see identify here, as some of you are probably familiar with compare statements, if not, I'm going to show you one that we came up with together that will help. In DP, if you're working with the paper 1 compare contrast statement, or the paper 2 compare contrast essay, which is a little bit longer, or if you're doing the AP side, AP US history, AP world history, where there's a compare contrast element, I have a statement below that's going to help, and that you can expand that into into more onto a bigger essay or what have you. But in any case, these are the ones that I had students do that weren't correct. So these were the negative quotes that we looked at for World War I. Now I'm going to transition. And what I had here are additional arguments. So when the students were a little bit discouraged, I said, okay, let's take a step back and let's look at some additional arguments. Let's look at maybe why the treaty wasn't so bad for Germany, the Treaty of Versailles, but perhaps it was worse for others. And in this case, we inject Russia. And we know at this time that in 1917, Russia dropped or quit from World War I, and at the Treaty of Versailles that they were in fact punished with territories taken from them. Okay, so using these three quotes, they were able to highlight some of the language, and I'm going to skip past that. If you're unfamiliar with that, I'm going to try to make a video at another time to show some of the language that you can use in the quotes to help students recognize that they don't need to look exactly for the same word, but synonyms or the same idea to help make those connections. But in any case, I wanted to get to the model quote. Now, this isn't one that I created, but I highlighted some of the words that I wanted to see. So we always start with the comparison. I'm going to kind of blow it up a little bit. So if you want to have, they actually wrote this. I didn't. This is the Google Doc that they worked on, but your model statement to use for future statements is what they titled it. And this is what they're going to be using in their notes, since that's one of the reasons why I wanted to make the video. But you're going to start with your comparison. So I highlighted the both. The highlights I put in, but the document itself was the one that they put together. So we're going to start with the comparison. First, you want to mention the two documents. Both the documents indicated, now right here, right away, they didn't indicate the specific documents. If in AP, usually you'll have a document A, B, C, D, E, or in, for example, for this one, you might have author such and such, and then this author, both state that, both agree that, both indicate that, et cetera, et cetera. So they didn't put that here, but I just want to put that as an FYI and when you do your lesson to make sure that you include that. Be specific. Which sources? Is it an A or B? Is it source 1 and 2? Is it source 3 and 4? Is it author such and such, author such and such, et cetera, et cetera. But make sure to include both of those people specifically so that whoever the reader, examiner, grader, they see exactly who you are comparing. Indicate that the Treaty of Versailles was more harsh towards Russia than it was towards Germany. This took some practice, but it's a bit vague, but at the same time, we're still practicing this and we're learning, but you get the idea that they were able to see that these three quotes that they examined, the two quotes that they selected, clearly showed that the treaty was harsh towards Germany, but even more harsh towards Russia. So now that we have the comparison, now that we have to distinguish. Quote 1 mentions that the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk demanded large territories from Russia. Vague, but to the point. This means that, this is the analyzing point, especially for AP, where you have in your rubric where you need to analyze, you are going to have to tell students, apart from quoting the text, you need to have them explain what that quote means, especially when you get into older history, or at least, you know, a pre-19th century where the language is a little different than what we, from the vernacular that we speak today. You're going to have to be more specific. What does that quote mean? And here they explain. They had to give up large amounts of territory that created their own country, state, etc. Quote 2 mentions that. Again, we're going right to the next comparison. How does it compare? And in this case, I highlighted the two comparisons in green. It mentions that Russia was weakened by a new German territory in the center of Europe. This means that. Again, this means that. This indicates that. There's other synonyms you can use. I'm starting my students off at the basic because at the moment we're also working on English skills, but I want them to feel comfortable putting a very good compare statement together. And that's what we have here. At least for beginners, I mean, there's a lot we can build on this, but we have the comparison, which I have highlighted in both. So for those who are thinking, how am I going to put a good comparison statement together? For what the examiners and what the graders want to see is, first, you have the two documents clearly stated, as I mentioned. Then you want to put the quote, the author, source A, source 1, what have you, and then state, kind of paraphrasing the quote. But immediately after that, they must explain what the quote means, okay? Then immediately go to the other quote, okay? And then in this case, same idea. Quoting the text, paraphrasing, if you will, and if they do quote, make sure they use quotes, then explain what it means, okay? Now, if you even want to get into more technical, for example, in the AP, there's a synthesis point where you have to think outside the box. So if we're looking at the Treaty of Versailles, perhaps there's another treaty. We could look at maybe a treaty in America, or something that was an agreement in East Asia or in the Middle East, something that's outside of Europe or in a different time frame or in a different geographic region. Or a treaty, for example, could be an agreement that you can use in thematic terms. So if you want to use not just a treaty for diplomatic reasons, if you want to compare this to something social, political, economic, I know in the AP, they like that synthesis where you're thinking outside the box. So this is significant because would be a quote you want to add to this if you want to add synthesis. For purposes of this, we're not going to do that. This is just for the paper one purposes, but I wanted to go ahead and show this. This quote, if you want to use, screenshot it, highlight it, use it for your students. It'll take some practice. I would go step by step with them, and don't hesitate to kind of be repetitive, using quotes. As long as the content you're teaching, you can constantly use and find quotes, various quotes from different perspectives, makes it more effective. And the more practice, obviously, the better. So I hope you got enough from this video. Use what you can from it, and make your teaching as exciting as possible. Have a good day.